Welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report. One of my favorite guests to have on the program, a biblical scholar and a wonderful naturopathic doctor as well, is Dr. Bob Thiel. Dr. Bob, one thing that I got recently in my mailbox, and it reminded me of things that I've been researching and following for years, is the ashes of the red heifer. And I know that they get the kalal at the Dead Sea years ago when they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is the ashes of the ancient temple. And they're supposed to mix the ashes of a red heifer and by specific rabbinic rules so they can't ever be yoked. It goes through a whole series of specific requirements. If there's even 2 black hairs on this red heifer, apparently they finally discovered a natural red heifer here in America, and it's about to be transferred to Israel, to the Temple Institute. And you're an expert on this, and actually you saw a recent video, but you also made a video on it as well. When I look at the blood moons, and we're going to get Mark Belts back on the program, and we start to kind of line things up because we're a watchman on the wall. We don't have dates, but we do have signs. And when I, in 1988, received the calling to do specific things, in 1992 received the fulfillment of the writing of the book Clay and Iron, and in 1999 released it with Prophecy Club. I was given Hebrew dates, and I had no idea of Hebrew. I didn't understand the Messianic things. In fact, I hadn't even attended Messianic church back then, which since then I've attended a number. And what I found is interesting is that the red heifer ashes can only be used on a specific date. It has to be the first day, which is after a Shemitah year, after 7 years, on the Feast of Tabernacles to sanctify the Temple Mount for rebuilding of the temple, or even putting a tabernacle of Moses up. Now, the Temple Institute has all the Kohanim. They have all the implements of setting up a sacrifice. And I disagree with the comments by Avi Lipkin, who, although he's in Israel, he thinks that the Kaaba has to be destroyed in Islam. Well, who's going to cut off the sacrifice if it's not Islam or Islam and their globalist confederates? So
I do not believe that Israel has to get rid of something to do with Islam.
No, I don't think
do anything. I
agree. I think that in fact you can even leave the Mosque of Omar exactly where it is and put up.
Oh yeah. Well, I actually, when I was over in Israel last year, I went over to the Temple Institute and I asked this guy who was working for them point blank, do you guys have to have a temple to sacrifice? You need such and such, and he didn't want to state it because he wasn't in charge of this place, but he kept referring me to rabbinical law, and I said, I already know all that. What you're trying to talk to me about, he says, I read the book of Ezra, and it said they did not lay the foundation for the new temple, yet they started to sacrifice in Ezra chapter 3. And he said, well, that's what it says. And so he then agreed that, yes, they could do it without having a temple. So those who believe a Jewish temple has to be built, I'm not saying one could not be built, okay, but those who say it has to be built for the Jews to do sacrifices are in error.
Right.
And in addition to that, a few years ago, I wrote the Sanhedrin. Now, they have what they call the reconstituted Sanhedrin over in Israel.
Right.
It's only recognized by probably the people who are in it, but and not too many more than that. But they also wrote me back. They put it in writing, and they were very clear. And I have an article at it at the cogwriter.com website on this. I have the quotes from them. And they said, oh, yes, we can sacrifice without having a temple. We can do it any time. And basically what they said is as soon as the Jewish courts get out of our way, we will do sacrifices.
Right.
And for your listeners who are unfamiliar with this, almost every year somebody goes to petition or tries to do sacrifices. The ones who do sacrifices get stopped by the police. Those who petition, they do a petition with the courts. They petition the courts saying, look, we're Jews, we're in our holy land, we are supposed to sacrifice, the Bible says it, we need to do it, so you need to let us do it. And what the courts always basically come back with is, you're right, you're in your holy land, you're right, you're Jewish, you're right, you have the right to sacrifice. However, because of the present distress or political situation, you can't do it now, but you have that right, and someday we're going to say yes. And that ties into another subject you were talking about.
Right.
And that is that there'll be some kind of a peace agreement coming at some point in time.
Yeah, and I see the peace agreement coming very soon with the blood moons. Yeah, here's what I see is, and this is, again, interlocking the work and research and supernatural, what I call inspiration to Mark Biltz and the things that I've been giving and other experts and rabbinical law and all these other things, the first potential day when the tribulation could start, which is the time of Jacob's trouble, because what it basically means is instead of tabernacling with the Messiah when he returns, they're going to tabernacle with the New World Order by setting up a sacrifice that is an abomination, because it's an abomination against the blood of Jesus that paid the price. And so starting a rabbinic sacrifice is not just a passive thing that's okay for them to do their thing. Because they rejected Messiah, it is a total rejection to restart a blood sacrifice after 2,000 years. And that will desolate, because it has to be tied into an integrated agreement, to desolate or remove parts of the Jewish population from areas that they have settlers. And by the way, they didn't just take the land by military things, they bought it. A lot of time they bought chunks of land at large amounts of money from Palestinians there, where there's olive groves and other things. They bought the land. So when
hardly anybody wanted the land before the Jews came.
Right, and most of it was desperately useless. I mean, it was desert. Nobody would be there except for hoot owls and coyotes and whatever, and the wild animals. And what the Jews did is, because they're very innovative, they brought in, they invented drip irrigation. They invented a lot of things so that 80% of the fruit coming into Europe comes from Israel, this little tiny strip of land called Israel. So what's going to happen, I think, is this agreement will mean a partitioning of the land, which is against Genesis 12:4. That we're going to see a restarting of the temple, and it doesn't have to have a full building. It can have a tabernacle of Moses. In fact, when I traveled to Israel back in 92 and 99, they actually had all the implements to actually have the sea cow skins and the curtain rods and everything to actually have a tabernacle of Moses set up overnight. They could do it overnight, literally put it up with lights, boom, it's up, and start doing the sacrifice with a brazen laver and everything.
Oh yeah, they're ready. They're ready. They're happy. They would do it sooner than later if they could.
Right. Now, here's what I think. I think we are months to years, not decades, away from this. And if you look at the first possible day when it could start, it's September 28th, according to Mark Biltz, 2015, which is the first Feast of Tabernacles after a Shemitah year, which occurs every 7 years. So the next Shemitah year is 7 years hence after that, which is 2022.
Well, I would make two comments along that line if I could.
Right.
First, I agree with Mark that 2014 seems unlikely, so 2015 would seem to be 2015 might be more probable. But in terms of the Shemitah year, there's a difference of opinion on when that is, and I could be wrong on what I'm going to say here, but that's why I'm going to say flat out I could be wrong before I say it.
Yeah, and so can I, but what I'm saying is the thing is that the Shemitah year, however you calculate it, it's the people that do the temple and how they calculate it that is important.
No,
so in other words, we could have various groups of factions of different Jews in different places like New York and elsewhere, different yeshivas, but the ones that are the Temple Mount Association that are going to get an okay from the Israeli government, they calculate out the Shemitah year according to the calendar that Mark Biltz uses.
But there's always a chance that they will decide, for whatever reason, that they misinterpreted, and they may pick a different year. That's all I'm saying. I don't know that.
Yeah, it's very unlikely. I'll tell you the reason why. Because they're following a calendar that was set up several hundred years after the crucifixion, because the Christian Church had made it impossible to follow their old Hebrew calendar, which wasn't correct. So they actually reset it to the ancient Hebrew calendar, which would use the sun and the moon. And so the calendar has now been corrected for the last, 1,650, 1,700 years?
Yeah, so I'm not questioning how they calculate the holy days.
So in other words, what I'm saying is that
I tend to agree with.
I'm saying the weight of evidence is Mark's done a lot of work on this, and I think the weight of evidence is I think he's probably correct. Although you could probably find some scholars somewhere who would disagree. It depends on the Temple Mount Institute, but it also means Jesus is coming. It means the world is in a lot of trouble. The world is a mess. And the tribulation is coming real soon.
Jesus is coming, the tribulation will come.
Yeah. And let's continue on this, talking about the red ashes of red heifer. What do you know, and what have you presented in your videos, Dr. Bob?
Okay, what I know and what I've presented is that this is not the first time red heifer has been found.
Right.
claims.
Yeah, it's happened multiple times. Yeah, but of course they have to be perfect.
Decades, we seem to have a red heifer of the decade, if I could use that expression. I just made that one up on the spot here. And the problem is, as you brought out in the first segment, there's what the Bible says this red heifer has to be like, and that for your listeners, and I'm not going to read this, but you can go to Numbers 19 verses 1 through 10. The Jews have added some extra criteria on this. Okay, for example,
right.
It doesn't say in this passage that it cannot have 2 black hairs.
No, that's a rabbinical statement.
Right, and if that's the way they're going to hold to it, whatever. But it also doesn't say that you can't put a piece of cloth on this cow. Okay,
right.
What the Bible says, it's not supposed to be yoked, and a yoke is a big, heavy thing that would cause marks all over the cow. And it does say the cow has to be without blemish. And I would suggest if you actually put a towel or a blanket on a cow, it wouldn't hurt it at all. It wouldn't cause any problem. But the Temple Institute's got their extra rules, I guess. Now, what your listeners, first of all, we should just mention, what is a heifer? It's a young cow that's over a year old that has not produced a calf. Okay? Now, some think it doesn't have to be a full year to be a heifer, but it's one that's not just a straight calf. So, and in terms of red, it's kind of a brownish red.
More auburn.
Although the current one that they have, at certain angles, it does look red. Okay, with the way the light hits it, it's definitely, sometimes it looks more reddish than brownish. But typically, and we have a picture of a Black Angus red heifer at our website. When you typically see them, they look mostly on the brownish side. But the Bible does talk about them. But this is the part I have not clarified from the Temple Institute. And let me just, I've read their materials on this. Right. Now, there's a couple of ideas. One idea that some have is that before any sacrifices can begin, they actually have to take this red heifer, sacrifice it, take the ashes, mix it with some part of the temple or whatever, and then they can...
Yeah, it's called a halal. It's the ashes from the previous sanctification rituals.
Okay, that's one view. The other view is that the Messiah, when he comes, is going to actually sacrifice the red heifer. But once the red heifer is found, it's a sign that it's acceptable to start the sacrifice without actually killing the red heifer. And that's what I'm reading when I read some of the information I've gotten from the Temple Institute. But it's not as clear as I've just said, so I may have misunderstood it. But the impression I got is they don't think they have to kill this cow yet. And cows live a fair amount of years. Now, I agree with you. I don't think we have decades before Jesus comes, although it's possible it could be over a decade. But
I don't think so. I don't think it's long. If you just look at the converging economic, environmental, geopolitical crises, the proliferation of weapons and the rise of Islam, the rise of globalism, the destruction of the state, the idea that there is a nation state, everything's converging. The surveillance society, cashlessness, everything. It's all converging on this, a really recent, a near date of cataclysm.
I agree that events are converging. I want to go slightly off topic, but I think you and your listeners will appreciate this. I got a book from people called preterists. Now, preterists are people who believe the Great Tribulation happened in 70 A.D., etc. Right. And I'm going through their nonsense logic, and I just keep shaking my head. And I will get through this book. Yeah. And maybe someday I'll come on and specifically talk about it. It
causes a headache, though. When you go through preterist arguments, it gives you a headache because the logic is like a Gordian knot. It's so twisted and convoluted and non-logical. It's like, you can't believe this. Can you really?
And it contradicts Scripture. And what gets me, and this is the same thing not only for preterists, but for those of us believe in prophecy, the preterists call us futurists, okay? And I don't mind that. That term doesn't offend me. But futurists believe that many of the prophecies are in the process of being fulfilled, and we're watching them because we expect other prophecies to be fulfilled relatively soon. Well, on the one hand, within the futurist group, there are other people who are wrong. Somebody sent me an email last week, by the way, saying that, according to him, Russia was the king of the North. Russia made a deal with Barack Obama 1,261 days ago. he's referring to the deal of Daniel 9:27, which you alluded to before, although you didn't mention the scripture. And that was 1,260 days later. Jesus was supposed to return yesterday, by the way, according to him, and everybody was supposed to be raptured up according to this guy.
Oh, really?
He sent me this, and I emailed him right back, and first of all, I said, don't send me religious spam. I didn't ask for this. Secondly, I said, I'm going to post about it. And third, this is utter nonsense. This is not going to happen. So even within the futurist groups, people who believe in prophecies, I've been astounded how many will not look at what Jesus said in Matthew 24. I mean, the disciples came up to him and said, look, okay, what's going to happen? When is all these things that happen? Jesus says, look, don't let anybody deceive you. Here's what's going to happen. Blah, 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 blah. He says the end is not yet. Then when you see this, this, and this, then it's the end. Okay?
Right.
And these people have not seen the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in a holy place, which Jesus mentions in Matthew 24.
But what do you think? What do you think it is?
Okay, this is tricky. I believe that this is going to have to do with some type of an image or an idol that people are going to think is not anti-Christian. That's I think how people are going to be deceived.
Right.
Now, I want to make it clear. I agree with you. When the Jews start to sacrifice in that area, the Muslims are going to be up in arms, and I'll throw up another group's going to be up in arms. The animal rights people, they're all going to be screaming. This is terrible. Even though, the sacrifice of the animals is probably more humane than the way most meat is killed. Okay. But we're going to see the animal rights people and the Arabs and others just rise up as this is horrible, and they're going to get it stopped. But I believe, looking at the prophecies, that it's a European leader who will stop it, and he will establish an abomination. If you look at the prior fulfillment, and I mentioned about preterists say that, look, these things in the book of Daniel happened thousands of years ago. They were fulfilled by Antiochus Epiphanes when he did various things. And you know what? He did do those things.
Yeah, but it's one of the principles in the Bible that there's often a dual fulfillment, which is way of God proving that He is beyond time and space, that He sees the end from the beginning, and that when there's a pre-revelation of it, there's a latter-day revelation of it as well.
Yes, but also in Daniel it says that things are going to be for the appointed time of the end. The appointed time of the end was not 2,500 years ago.
No.
And that's the part that part of Daniel.
The appointed time of, and not the end of the world, by the way, the end of the aeon is now. We're in it. And the world will go on. It says there shall be no end to the world. But it's going to go through some tough times, some birth pangs. Back in a moment. Welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report Clay and Iron Show. And by the way, we'll be posting up soon a lot of new information on clay and iron as well. clayandandIron.com, which comes from the book of Daniel. And so we are at many of the prophecies in Daniel, by the way, were prescribed against, that the Jews were not allowed to read or study because they actually would connect directly to the New Testament and to the fulfillment of the Messiah coming. And in fact, many of them knew exactly when he should have come. And this is one of the examples of how it's going to be an abomination that'll desolate, that they'll actually not accept Messiah the second time, many Jews, but some will. We have in the third hour Carl Gallups, where he's going to talk about a big revival occurring with Messianic Jews, where basically dyed-in-the-wool Jews that don't accept Messiah, in fact, with the comments they treat in the Torah and the Zohar and other books is just horrendous. But they're now turning and accepting through one of the senior rabbis that recently died at 108. They're accepting this, and that's why the movie, The Rabbi Who Found Messiah, we're going to talk about that in the follow-up. Last 3 or 4 months ago, we had Carl back on to do a follow-up. What's happening right now is very biblical. If you look at the signs and you just use logic, like a computer, and you analyze this and just looked at all of the different factors, which God wants us to use our brain. He doesn't want us to leave our brain at the door when we become believers. You'd have to look at it and say, my gosh, between the physical signs, the economic signs, the geopolitical signs, if Israel gets into a real shooting war with 200,000 missiles coming at it, no matter how many nuclear weapons it has or Air Force, they're done.
Without relying on God, they don't have a chance, and they don't rely on God. They do rely on their military, and now their military is helping them, but the time is going to come where they are going to be facing an overwhelming threat. You and I were talking on the break. If Iran and Syria and even Russia turn against Israel, your expression is Israel's toast. And what I was starting to say when the music came back on to come to this segment, you read biblical prophecy, and you see that Damascus, the capital of Syria, is supposed to be a ruinous heap and not inhabited. Now, some claim that Damascus is the longest continuously inhabited city on the planet. Whether it is or isn't can be debated, but there is no debate that since Isaiah was inspired to write that, Damascus, Syria, has been continuously inhabited and has not become a ruinous heap. So we know that's going to happen. Now, today, in case your listeners are not aware, today was the inauguration for the third term of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. He began his third presidential term today. Did you hear what he said today?
No, I didn't hear his comment. No, what was it?
Oh, yeah, he had a comment or two today. He wanted everybody to know. And I will read this. This is from Reuters. Soon we will see that the Arab regional and Western states that supported terrorism will pay a high price, he told the supporters at the presidential palace. So that was a quote from Reuters. And what he is saying, he says, listen, you people have been fighting me. You've been supporting the terrorists. Now we've got these terrorists over in Iraq. They're calling themselves the Islamic State. For a while, their name was ISIS, which was the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. They haven't made it. They haven't gotten Syria yet. We got the United States, who a couple of weeks ago said we're going to give $500 million more to the opposition to Assad over in Syria. And it seems that some of these people that the U.S. has backed in the past are involved over in Iraq. And we have the problem over in Iraq that the United States is supporting the Shiite Muslim leader, which is on the same side, by the way, as Iran, because that's who he went to for support when the U.S. wouldn't send enough troops over there.
Right.
So in Iraq, we can support somebody on the Iranian side, or we can support somebody who's against Assad, yet we're against Assad, we're against Iran, the U.S. that is, but we consider that ISIS is a terrorist organization that we don't want to support, even though I believe we have provided some type of support to them in the past.
Well, we gave them 74 Stinger missiles 2 weeks ago. I mean, we've given them all kinds of anti-aircraft missiles and advanced battlefield weapons. This is craziness. And they've already sworn that they're going to cause all kinds of problems. We have really good evidence that ISIS, a branch of them, killed these 3 teenagers. 2 of them were dual Israeli-American citizens. So ISIS is not our friend, even though Obama, who is a closet Sunni Muslim apologist, or Sunni Muslim himself, and an operative of the Saudi Arabian government, is proposing this, even though the Saudis now are freaked out because their bad dog has gotten out of control because they're now threatening even the Saudis.
Right, the Saudis are concerned. The people in Kuwait are concerned. Oh, and speaking
they're
of
concerned. They're the ones who supported these guys because they have this stupid idea, and I've talked to people about this. They're experts on the Middle East. The Saudis and the Qataris think that they can buy anybody off with money, and that's not always
true. Well, because it worked
true.
Somewhat for a little while.
Yeah, for a while until your bad dog turns on you, and now you're in trouble because the bad dog decides, I don't care how much money you pay me, I'm going to bite you.
Well, there's more than that. The bad dog with that money got to get himself well. Okay,
right.
He got to support his military, put his network together, and then he comes back. Well, anyway, you mentioned the president. I'd like to talk about, for just a second, I wasn't planning on doing this, but I'll bring it up now, our former Secretary of State. She was interviewed by Jon Stewart, I think yesterday or today.
Right.
It was yesterday. And she was bemoaning what was going on over with Hamas and Israel and all that stuff. And she was talking about the deal that she put together, and it fell apart. And you think it would be politically incorrect to do it, but she was saying that she made a deal with the Muslim Brotherhood and Mohammed Morsi in Egypt, and that deal would have worked, and it was working. But now the new government in Egypt, which the United States supposedly also supports, we supported the last one, and they got overthrown, and we're supporting the new one. So, well, this one, Hamas doesn't like them. And she was right on one part, by the way. She said Hamas didn't like them, so they probably wouldn't listen. And so you heard today Hamas flat out said, we're not interested in a ceasefire. Don't even bother to talk to us, almost, is basically the impression I got from it.
Right.
So Hillary Clinton was right on that particular point. but the fact that she was talking about almost like the good old days when they dealt with the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, for your listeners who may not be familiar with this, the Muslim Brotherhood is or has been, or was, the most well-organized Islamic group in the world, in the sense that they wanted to put together an Islamic caliphate.
Right, and they were founded, by the way, they were founded in the 1920s in London, England. I call it Londonistan.
Anyway, and so their goal is to set up a group, and this is where not being a preterist is very helpful. The Bible talks about something rising up called the King of the South. You read about them.
Which is a caliphate. The King of the South is a caliphate, right?
That is correct. Yeah. And so preterists say, this is all fulfilled. It's like, the Islamic State over in Iraq, the Muslim Brotherhood, which has to go underground again because in Egypt because they got kicked out of office. But their goal is to take back all lands Islam ever had. And ISIS, by the way, stupidly again repeated the goal to take Spain back as well. Now, I don't think the West is going to let them take back Spain, but I'll tell you what, from Morocco to Saudi Arabia, maybe to Somalia, maybe to Afghanistan, the West seems to be very, very willing to allow that. And that'll play into what these Islamists want. And the Bible warns, both in Daniel 9, verses 40 through 43, and Ezekiel 30, verses 2 to 8, that an Islamic, the Bible doesn't use the term Islamic, I'm sorry, an Arabic, Kurdish, use Kurds, Nubian,
Nubian, which is Ethiopian.
With Turks. Yeah, well, the Nubians are Cushites, and it's a whole other subject.
Yeah, Sudanese, the northern Sudanese, which of course have been killing the Christian black southern Sudanese, and the Ethiopians. Right,
and so it talks about that kind of confederation forming. And the interesting thing about it is, according to biblical prophecy, which of course I believe, it's not going to turn out well. They'll temporarily think they're doing well, but according to the two lengthy discussions of this confederation in the Bible, it's not going to turn out well for the participants.
No, not at all. Not at all. That's a very good analysis. Back in just a moment, Dr. Bob Thiel. Welcome back, and we'll be posting a lot of links up so people can read and find out themselves. We tell people, don't believe anything we say. Research it, read the Bible, go do your own research. Once you find a portion of what you find makes sense, follow it, be a watchman, find out what's going on. Again, you can be, it doesn't matter what you start off, an atheist, a Buddhist, a Jew, God knows. And a lot of people, quote, think they have, quote, been saved, and they haven't gone through the full salvation process. We're going to talk about that a bit in hour 3 with Carl Gallups. He has an interesting book called The Magic Man in the Sky. You've written a number of articles now, Dr. Bob, that talks about end-time issues and things like this. We're really basically at the time where man has become very arrogant in his wisdom. Man thinks that it's conquering nature, setting up world empires, conquering space, when really we are woefully ignorant. And in fact, what we're doing is primarily despoiling our crib. And
we're setting up our own destruction with things like GMO crops and all that kind of stuff that we've talked about. Right.
Everything we do actually is corrupt and wrong. And of course, it's corrupted right at the very heart, which just starts at money, which is why Jesus drove the money changers, because ultimately things are driven by the god of mammon, the god of power and greed, and the god of forces, which is the force of money. The force of, and we're getting close to what I call the biological singularity, where disease will not have to occur within 10 to 20, 30 years max, where human lifespan literally will not be limited to 120 years. We'll actually be able to tweak the human genetic code so that people won't be dying of regenerating tissue. I have many experts on stem cells. We use a number of nutraceuticals and technology now to help stimulate regeneration, including Somopulse and Lumen Photon, a number of nutraceuticals. Stem cell therapy clinics popping up all over the world, and they're getting more and more advanced. Unfortunately, they're also doing some very evil things, recombining humans and animals. And Seed Corporation, based out of Chicago, with Dr. Richard Seed, a physicist, is recombining genetics of pigs and humans to create multiple organ transplant platforms, which are 75% human DNA. I mean, that's pretty darn bizarre. This is right out of the book of Joshua.
That is wrong. These ideas, they're trying to create monsters and all that kind of stuff.
And by the way, this goes into super soldiers and everything. People say it's speculative. No, it's not speculative. You can go and research it yourself and find these corporations are on the public, forums. So when we say this stuff, it's just because you are ignorant of it and haven't read it and don't realize we're at the time where many diseases like super plagues, like pig-based PERV, which is a virus, if they do recombinant human work, you could end up with a super virus created by simply forming a new recombinant. So when we propose these things that are biblical and spiritual, you can't separate the spiritual from understanding the geopolitical. People do. They'll be like the bug hitting the glass. They'll never make sense of things because they don't dissect the fact that there's evil stalking the world and mankind. And our God is God, and He's about to take back the lease that Satan won, and is going to redeem the planet Earth besides the people and the population. So that's going to happen because human beings in their world, without a creator-loving God that's actually going to intervene, we're done. The human race is about to extinguish itself.
Jesus warned that, unless those days would be shortened, no flesh would be saved alive. He said that in Matthew 24.
Right.
And, we talked about the preterists earlier, and they're not seeing that we've got the rise of Islamic forces getting together. And the Bible warns about that because they say, that stuff was done thousands of years ago. Why would they say the time, at least for the appointed time of the end? The appointed time of the end was not hundreds of years before Jesus came. Okay, so that makes the prophecies in Daniel remain relevant. One of the other things that preterists say is that the Great Tribulation happened in the year 70 A.D. because Jerusalem was destroyed and the temple was destroyed. But they're reading into some things that are not there, and they miss certain things. Briefly, it says after the tribulation, immediately or after the signs of the sky and the sun and whatever, but then Jesus returns. Well, they say that all of this stuff in Matthew 24 happened, but, Jesus had not come back. He's supposed to immediately return when the Great Tribulation was over. You would think, or when the tribulation time was over, that he would have been back, back in the first century, and he didn't come back then. No. And I'm trying to figure out what their argument is on that part. But for those...
But they don't have one.
No,
they don't have
not
one.
Not a legitimate one anyway. But for those of us who are watching world events, we see things going on in Europe, the beast power trying to form over there. It
is going to form, actually. You can see it.
I know, but they're working. Speaking of that...
I'll tell you a new twist that I found out yesterday that I want to throw out, and maybe you can expand on it. It turns out that it's probably within a year Turkey's going to join the European Union. It turns out there's 70 million Turks. Right now, altogether, there's 300 million Europeans and 50 million Muslims in Europe right now before Turkey. When Turkey joins, it's going to add an additional 70. So that'll make 120 million Muslims and Turks in the European Union, and there's going to be a flood of Turkic peoples from Russia and the empires all around, from Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, etc., and even Iran. Half of the Iranian population are Turkic. People don't realize that, Muslims.
Well, they got around 500 million or so people in Europe. But yesterday, I don't know if you followed this or not, but Jean-Claude Juncker became the president, or was elected president of the European Commission. He's to be the most powerful single individual within the European Union. He wants more integration, more technology, more military. He wants Europe to be the center of the world and not be watching the United States, but basically leading the United States. He wants to put in more trade agreements that I think will tie in with the prophecies warned about. Well,
that trade agreement they're already working on with the United States would tie down make our Congress and our Senate vestigial, and then international bureaucrats, just like 85% of the laws in Europe are made by bureaucrats in Brussels, make the separate governments of Ireland, Scotland, etc., useless and completely irrelevant. That's what they want to do.
He put out a 14-page document yesterday where he basically said that the U.S. courts are going to have to accept what we are saying. And the Americans, specifically listed the United States. The only country I remember reading about, in there, I don't remember seeing anything about Ukraine, anything about Russia, China, but the United States was mentioned 2 or 3 times in this that I remember reading yesterday.
Right.
And it's like, the U.S., you have to do it our way. U.S., you're not doing it. You're not listening to us. You have to listen.
Well, the thing is, the banks, people don't realize that 5 of the 6 major voting members of the Federal Reserve are actually European. So the bank that actually makes our money, if we say we want another $1 trillion, is European. What that basically means is, although there's, quote, Federal Reserve banks across the United States, the actual inner core are all European. And the coming together of Europe in the middle of a disaster, which is happening right now because the economies are shot to pieces in Europe, is the only solution they have left is to form a total, if you want to call it, totalitarian state and absorb a large population to, quote, rebuild themselves. And that's what's going to happen. We're going to see the rise of a greater Europe that will be, to a great extent, Muslim. And people don't see that. If that's why the protests in Germany and France, they're all Muslim protests against the attacks by Israel against Gaza. And of course, Hamas is not going to capitulate. Their actual, charter is basically death to all Israel, death to the state. How can you negotiate with somebody that says you have to die? I mean, it's like negotiating with a psychotic murderer that says, in order for me to be happy, you have to be dead. You can't negotiate. That's not possible.
Well, Juncker yesterday in his paper flat out called for stricter banking controls. And that reminds me of the past.
Well, that's Glass-Steagall. If they do Glass-Steagall, guess what, Obama? And the U.S. Federal Reserve will have to mutate into a world reserve bank, because now the BRICS have formed their own bank and their own world bank that they're talking about in the World IMF.
Today, that was announced last night or this morning.
By the way, they won't survive. China, Russia, and South Africa, they have to have customers, okay? So eventually this is going to come together in a very messy world conglomerate economic system that will eventually become cashless, i.e. the mark of the beast. That's what's going to happen. It'll be a basket of currencies like the Bretton Woods. It'll be also cashless, and it'll be controlled in cyberspace by the powers that be.
The plan is to control buying and selling, and the Bible warns about that, Revelation 13, verses 16 through 18.
Yeah, and that's what they want to do. They want to make sure there's no bartering, no cryptocurrencies, no gold and silver, not even coin in your pocket or currency, all in their supercomputers. And that's what they want to do with Mr. Juncker and all the European banks. And we're not far away. We're a matter of months and years, not decades, away from the converging catastrophe. So, God's going to get us through it, but we need a lot of prayer, a lot of honesty, and a lot of action in order for us to survive through this.
And as Jesus said, we should watch.
We have to be watchmen and watch women. Yeah, excellent talk today, but Dr. Bob, I'll post up all the articles you're going to send me. Thank you.